All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the lesson for this week. So this week, there are a few things that I'd like to touch down on. Like I mentioned, we are going to do a lesson on how Odin lost his eye. But I do want to point out that a lot of the things I've been seeing on TikTok and within the Norse community on social media is there's a lot of my scriptures say what I know, you're wrong, and I want to point out that that's not how it is, guys. I mean, we all draw from multiple sources. We all draw from what we can. And some of us just haven't come across the same books. Some of us have seen books that are different that we really like for one reason or another. So with that being said, there are two books that I'm going to be using today. And one of them is this book right here. And the reason I'm going to be using this book right here is because even though this book does say Tales of Norse Mythology, this book does have more of a historical viewpoint on it. This is not a be all end all book of the mythologies, okay? But people who only have access to this book, or this is the book they found that they really like, the stories they're going to say for things are different. So, like, two of the stories that I'm going to talk about today actually come directly from this book. And the reason I'm talking about them is because of the fact that in here it references the historical portion of it, not just the myth. So, for that is going to be the Thor and Tyr section of the lesson today. So, I know a lot of us, we want to have everything we can as reference material. And we've looked along the lines of online, we've looked along the lines of resource books, and even here in the Ravens Banner and the Boar Clan, we have our own view on what is the resource material. But that is not the be-all, end-all resource. There are multiple resources that we all can access, and we all can find. And some of us may have resources that no one else here has heard of. And that's okay. If that's the resource you have, just when people ask about it, let them know that that's where your source material comes from. Let them know that when they say that doesn't sound like what I've read, well, I mean, it could just be that the book you have is different. And then let them know the author and let them know the name of the book. Maybe they'll want to go pick it up, even if it is just so that they can have better understanding of what you're saying in the story you're telling. So with that being said, we are going to go to the first story, which is Odin and Mimir's Well, which is found in Neil Gaiman's Norse mythology. We will start there. So, in Jotunheim, in the home of the giants, is Mimir's Well. It bubbles up from deep in the ground, and it feeds Yggdrasil, the world tree. Mimir, the wise one, the guardian of memory, knows many things. His well is wisdom, and when the world was young, he would drink every morning from the well, by dipping the horn, known as the Gallarhorn, into the water and draining it. Long, long ago, when the worlds were young, Odin put on his long cloak and his hat, and in the guise of a wanderer he traveled through the land of the giants, risking his life to get to Mimir, to seek wisdom. "One drink from the water of your well, Uncle Mimir," said Odin. "That is all I ask for." Mimir shook his head. Nobody drank from the well but Mimir himself. He said nothing. Seldom do those who are silent make mistakes. "I am your nephew," said Odin. "My mother, Bestala, was your sister." "That is not enough," said Mimir. "One drink. With a drink from your well, Mimir, I will be wise. Name your price." "Your eye is my price," said Mimir. "Your eye in the pool." Odin did not ask if he was joking. The journey through giant country to get to Mimir's Well had been long and dangerous. Odin had been willing to risk his life to get there. He was willing to do more than that for the wisdom he sought. Odin's face was set. "Give me a knife," was all he said. After he had done what was needed, he placed his eye carefully in the pool. It stared up at him through the water. Odin filled the Gallarhorn with water from Mimir's pool, and he lifted it to his lips. The water was cold. He drained it down. Wisdom flooded into him. He saw farther and more clearly with his one eye than he ever had with two. Thereafter, Odin was given other names. Blinder, they called him, the blind god, and Boar, the one-eyed, and Belagi, the flaming-eyed one. Odin's eye remains in Mimir's well, preserved by the waters that feed the world Ash, seeing nothing, seeing everything. Time passed. When the war between the Aesir and the Vanir was ending, and they were exchanging warriors and chiefs, Odin sent Mimir to the Vanir as an advisor to the Aesir god, Honir, who would be the new chief of the Vanir. Honir was tall and good-looking, and he looked like a king. When Mimir was with him to advise him, Honir also spoke like a king and made wise decisions. But when Mimir was not with him, Honir seemed unable to come to a decision, and the Vanir soon tired of this. They took their revenge, not on Honir, but on Mimir. They cut off Mimir's head and sent it to Odin. Odin was not angry. He rubbed Mimir's head with certain herbs to prevent it from rotting, and he chanted charms and incantations over it, for he did not wish Mimir's knowledge to be lost. Soon enough, Mimir opened his eyes and spoke to him. Mimir's advice was good, as it was always good. Odin took Mimir's head back to the well beneath the world tree, and he placed it there, beside his eye in the waters of knowledge of the future and of the past. Odin gave the Gallarhorn to Heimdall, watchman of the gods. On the day the Gallarhorn is blown, it will wake the gods, no matter where they are, no matter how deeply they sleep. Heimdall will blow the Gallarhorn only once, at the end of all things, at Ragnarok. Now, if you look at that same story in different texts, in different volumes, you'll find different things in that story. As a matter of fact, in this book, the translation they took from it was that when Odin gave up his eye, he also broke off a branch of Yggdrasil, and that is how he got his spear. It depends on the source material as to how you know the story. I want everybody to be aware of that. So, in the Tales of Norse Mythology, they have in here a reference. It's not a big reference. It's not even a long story. And majority of this story after the description is actually giving a key to why historically they say we wear the Mjolnir around our neck, akin to the Christian cross. You know, I don't agree with this, but as a historical reference, like the information in here is here, and we should all be aware that this is a source that people get information from. And with the way this is written, it would not surprise me that a ton of Christians probably look at this book and read it just so that they can call out anyone who claims heathenry as their religious background. So with that being said, I want y'all to listen to the reading and take from it what you will, you know, whether or not you believe this to be why we do it, or whether you believe that, you know, portions of it could be, other portions of it are probably just a little bit more of the Christian propaganda. Thor was the proud possessor of a magic hammer called Mjolnir, the Crusher, which he hurled at his enemies, the frost giants, with destructive power, and which possessed the wonderful property of always returning to his hand, however far away he might hurl it. As this huge hammer, the emblem of the thunderbolts, was generally red hot, the god had an iron gauntlet called Aaron Grapier, which enabled him to grasp it firmly. He could hurl Mjolnir a great distance, and his strength, which was always remarkable, was doubled when he wore his magic belt called Mingjord. Thor's hammer was considered so very sacred to the ancient northern people that they were wont to make the sign of the hammer, as the Christians later taught them to make the sign of the cross, to ward off all evil influences and to secure blessings. Now, that part right there where it says later taught them, it is up to debate and interpretation, but that could very well mean that they were using the sign of the hammer much to the same way the Christians used the cross, and later were taught the cross was the way they, under God, under Christianity, it should be done. So remember, again, take some of this and logically look at it, but also remember that this is more historical reference to the mythologies and how they interacted with what was interpreted to be the way mankind interacted with it. So it's very let's just say it varies on person to person as to whether or not they want to take it to heart. But the reason we're reading it and the reason we're going over it is because I want everyone to understand that, like I said, no matter where you come from in your heathenry, everybody started somewhere, and there is a large possibility that a lot of people started with books just like this one, or just like solitary practitioners, which I actually had the northern traditions of the solitary practitioner, or even the book Odin, which kind of references him as more of a patron to worship than anything else. But there are multiple sources that we all pull from when we learned our knowledge. I want everybody to be aware that those are distinct possibilities. So instead of arguing with our fellow heathens, we need to sit down and ask them, like, hey, where did you get your information? I was curious because I want to see how that coincides with my information, and both of us can learn from this experience and grow. So back to what it was saying. The same sign was also made over the newly born infant with the when water was poured over its head, a name given. The hammer was used to drive in boundary stakes, which it is considered sacrilegious to remove, to hollow the threshold of a new home, to solemnize a marriage, and lastly, it played a part in the consecration of the funeral pyre, upon which the bodies of heroes, together with their weapons and steeds, and in some cases with their wives and dependents, were burned. In Sweden, Thor, like Odin, was supposed to wear a broad-brimmed hat, and hence the storm clouds in the country were known as Thor's hat, a name also given to one of the principal mountains in Norway. The rumble and roar of the thunder were said to be the roll of his chariot, for he alone among the gods never rode on horseback, but walked, or drove in a brazen chariot drawn by two goats. The gods thus drove from place to place. He was called Aku Thor, or Thor with the charioteer. And in southern Germany, the people, fancying a brazen chariot alone inadequate to furnish all the noise they heard, declared it was loaded with copper kettles, which rattled and clashed, and therefore often called him, with disrespectful familiarity, the kettle vendor. So this actually points out to multiple different sources. Like, you are seeing how different cultures had different names for Thor, and with that, you're seeing that all the sources, though different, come from different things. So we can't judge someone simply because their knowledge is different than ours. What we have to do is we have to sit and be willing to open our minds to the possibility that the reason they did that was because of something. Much like how the Germans referred to him as the kettle bringer, simply because of the fact that, yes, with all that noise and thunder, it does sound like, unless the wheels are made of like something strange, each culture has their own representation of what they interpret it as, and that's what we need to be aware of. So the next one, which this story here, the name of this story is very misleading. The name of this story is Tyr's Sword. Now, the reason The reason that it's referred to as Tyr's sword is because let's see, how do I put this? Tyr was considered strong. Tyr was considered honorable. Tyr was considered to be a swordman. I mean, he sacrificed his sword hand to Fenrir to prove that he wasn't being tricked. Yet, still, even without his sword hand, Tyr is still a very strong, a very powerful god and wields the sword very well. So, the fact that a story, actually historical story, fits along these lines is actually pretty interesting. So like I said, this story is called Tyr's Sword, and it's actually more of a telling of the discovery of a sword that was passed down or that went from hand to hand throughout the ages. And some of the hands that held it actually held power, and why the sword was considered to be the sword of Tyr. So, according to an ancient legend, Tyr's sword, which had been fashioned by the same dwarves, son of Ivan, who had also made Odin's spear, was held very sacred by his people, to whose care he had entrusted it, declaring that those who possess it were sure to have victory over their foes. But although carefully guarded in a temple where it was hung, so that it reflected the first beams of the morning sun, it suddenly and mysteriously disappeared one night. A Vala druidess, or prophetess, consulted by the priests, revealed that the Norns had decreed that whoever wielded it would conquer the world and come to his death by it. But in spite of all entreaties, she refused to tell who had taken it or where it might be found. Sometime after this occurrence, a tall, dignified stranger came to Cologne, where Vitellius the Roman prefect was feasting, and called him away from his beloved dainties. In the presence of the Roman soldiery, he gave him the sword, telling him it would bring him glory and renown, and finally hailed him as emperor. The cry was taken up by the assembled legions, and Vitellius, without making any personal effort to secure the honor, found himself elected emperor of Rome. The new ruler, however, was also absorbed in indulging his taste for food and drink, that he paid but little heed to the divine weapon. One day, while leisurely making his way towards Rome, he carelessly left it hanging in the antechamber of his pavilion. A German soldier seized this opportunity to substitute in its stead his own rusty blade, and the bestowed emperor did not notice the exchange. When he arrived at Rome, he learned that the Eastern legions had named Vespasian emperor, and that he was even then on his way home to claim the throne. Searching for the sacred weapon to defend his right, Vitellius now discovered the theft, and, overcome by superstitious fear, did not even attempt to fight. He crawled away into a dark corner of his palace, whence he was ignominiously dragged by the enraged populace to the foot of the Capitolian hill. There the prophecy was duly fulfilled, for the German soldier who had joined the opposite faction, coming along at that moment, cut off Vitellius' head with the sacred sword. The German soldier now charged with one legion to another, and traveled over many lands, but wherever he and his sword were found, victory was assured. After winning great honor and distinction, the man, having grown old, retired from active service to the banks of the Danube, where he secretly buried his treasured weapon, building his hut over its resting place to guard it as long as he might live. When he lay on his deathbed, he was implored to reveal where he had hidden it, but he persistently refused to do so, saying that it would be found by the man who was destined to conquer the world, but that he would not be able to escape the curse. Years passed by. Wave after wave, the tide of barbarian invasion swept over the part of the country, and last of all came the terrible Huns under the leadership of Attila, the Scourge of God. As he passed along the river, he saw a peasant mournfully examining his cow's foot, which had been wounded by some sharp instrument hidden in the long grass. And when search was made, the point of a buried sword was found sticking out of the soil. Attila, seeing the beautiful workmanship and the fine state of preservation of this weapon, immediately exclaimed that it was Cheru's sword, and brandishing it above his head, he announced that he would conquer the world. Battle after battle was fought by the Huns, who, according to the saga, were everywhere victorious, until Attila, weary of warfare, settled down in Hungary, taking to wife the beautiful Bulgarian princess Ildikio, whose father he had slain. The princess, resenting the murder of her kin and wishing to avenge it, took advantage of the king's state of intoxication upon his wedding night to secure possession of the divine sword, with which she slew him in his bed, once more fulfilling the prophecy uttered so many years before. The magic sword again disappeared for a long time, to be unearthed once more, for the last time, by the Duke of Alva, Charles V's general, who shortly after won the victory of Mulberg in 1547. The Franks were wont to celebrate early material gain in honor of the sword, but it is said that when the heathen gods were renounced in favor of Christianity, the priests transferred many of their attributes to the saints, and that this sword became the property of Archangel Saint Michael, who has wielded it ever since. Tyr, whose name was synonymous with bravery and wisdom, was also considered to be the ancient northern people to have the white-armored Valkyries, Odin's attendants, at his command, and they thought that he it was who designated the warriors whom they should transfer to Valhalla to aid the gods on the last day. So the things I want you to take from this story. If you were just starting out, if this was the first text you ever read, these are the stories you would know and you would keep close to your heart. Are they right? Are they true? Is the stories that are told in this book any more accurate than the stories that we have shared, the stories that we have come to know, the sagas, the mythologies, the Eddas, are all translated and translated differently, and thus being there are a lot of different beliefs. And we are Norse pagan. We do not follow one strict tradition. There's many different walks and paths among us that lead to where we are. And it is my request that everybody who is part of the Boar's banner, part of the Raven's banner, part of the clans, part of the kindred, don't shame somebody for the knowledge that they hold. It is not our place to shame them for that. But ask them their source. Ask them how they feel about maybe talking about different ones and seeing different sides of the same story from different interpretations and different perspectives. We should give each other that kind of respect. We should be able to sit with each other and talk about this kind of thing, not just angrily point fingers about who's wrong and who's right. Because in the end, all of our translations right now are all interpretations. And every one of us needs to understand that and know that. And are there books that we prefer over others? Everybody has their own preference. But it's important for us to think about that and to question that. So the thing I'd like to end with today is, among the many different sources we can cite, I would like everyone to spend this week in reflection and thinking about what different sources you've come across that might not be the same source that everyone's mentioned. What different sources you can look into to find the different names of Odin. And bring that back into next week and share that with others. Let others know, like, these are what I found, and I found them in this source. I'd never heard of this source. I'd never thought of this as being a source, but it turns out this is a source. This is a material that we can use and we can learn from. And that's what I want everyone to do. That's my mini lesson for y'all this week. Search through different texts, and by all means, look outside of the resource list, but cite your source. So what I'd like everyone to do is to go into the Ravens Banner and the Boar Clan. We both have the same reference resource material list. Look at that list and then pull from things that aren't on that list. If you can't, that's fine. If you can't find anything, that's fine. But those of you who are inclined to research and want to learn like different sources, that is one way you can do it. And I would be very appreciative, and I would think it'd be very beneficial to the clan as well if everybody kind of contributed and looked into that to see where they could find other sources and share that with each other. And on that note, I will be back on later today. If anybody wants to reach out and message me about anything that they had concerns with or questions about, feel free to ask. I'm always available for that. It just might take me a little while to get to you now that I'm working again. So, but other than that, everybody enjoy your Thursday. Everybody enjoy your lessons and share it and spread it amongst each other. Let everyone know like what they can see. And do know that this video will be available as a link in the server for the week. So if somebody didn't participate, if somebody didn't get to see it, they're like, oh, I wish I could have seen that. Just tell them to go to the class channel inside the server, and that they can access it, because it will be linked there. Hopefully for the rest of the week. We'll see. Other than that, guys, have a good day.